peaceful. Praying, what does that have anything to do with you? That's fine.
First off, we're actually born here. We're
born here. Yes, we were.
To my fellow Muslim Americans, one, do not be intimidated. Do not back down. Do not shy away from being some of the best of what America has to offer. Don't do it, not for a second. America is just as much our land, our home, as it is anyone else's whose parents happen to immigrate from Ireland or from Germany or any other country. I want to throw out a call to action. We as Muslims, in my opinion, need to be more engaged with folks on all sides of the spectrum. It's not just those that we feel comfortable with. Hello there, everyone. I woke up this morning to a video that some friends of mine sent to me and shared with me of this viral clip that's been going around online of Perry Greene, who happens to be Marjorie Taylor Greene's ex-husband. Marjorie Taylor Greene, we'll get into a little bit about her background and her significance, but she is a congresswoman as of 2021, I believe, of the 14th Congressional District of Georgia. She's a U.S. representative. She sits in the U.S. House of Representatives. MTG, as she's kind of infamously referred to, but sometimes by her critics, and sometimes I may use MTG just for ease of being able to refer to her during this video. It's not necessarily because I'm trying to use it in any derogatory way, but essentially this ex-husband of MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they were evidently married for 27 years, and apparently they divorced back in 2022. There was this video that's been going around of her ex-husband kind of verbally harassing 3 young Muslim women in a Georgia, I believe it's Alpharetta, Georgia. It's a suburb of Atlanta, of a mall parking garage. And he's basically in the driver's seat of his, big gray Tesla truck, Cybertruck. And he starts just going after these 3 young Muslim women in terms of harassing them verbally and just kind of berating them in the parking lot while they're kind of just going about their business. So before we get too into the weeds, there's going to be a lot to dissect and kind of dive into with this. I just wanted to give a little bit of a preamble as far as who this is. It's Perry Greene, the ex-husband of Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman who is, very much connected to nowadays the Republican right-wing conservative kind of MAGA movement. And we'll get into a bunch of details around this. But before we do, I just want to play the video for those who haven't seen it, give you a chance to kind of get a sense of what the interaction was between this gentleman, Perry Greene, and these 3 young Muslim women. And then we'll get into some more details here. So let's cut to that right now. And we'll be right back and follow up on the back end as far as analysis and commentary.
Y'all want to do all kind of crazy. Where are you from? What country?
It doesn't matter where we're from. It does not, though. Why does it matter to you, though?
Because you're worshiping a false god.
No.
Yes, it is.
Are you Christian? You have the same God, bro.
Go back to your country,
Okay. That's perfect. Thank you. We know what we believe.
please. But don't come to America and believe this. Go back to your country.
Okay.
Told
That's
you anything.
fine.
No one told you anything.
We're sitting here. We were quiet. We were peaceful. Praying. What does that have anything to do with you?
Go back to your country.
That's fine.
You're demolished.
First off, we're actually born here. We're
born here. Yes, we were.
Because
It doesn't matter.
It's a religion.
It's a religion.
Don't nuns wear covering themselves?
Let's go. Let's go.
We're not even Afghani.
It doesn't matter.
You're literally racist. You're just assuming things.
sorry if it's not on your standards. You can go ahead and leave. I don't know why you're wasting your time.
I can call the cops.
If you're gonna keep harassing us, that's fine.
Just go about your day. What's the
Are you gonna follow us?
What's the
Do you want to learn about our religion? Like, what is it?
Have a good day.
Okay. All right.
Just leave him alone. Go have a good day, bro.
Oh my God.
So, as you could see, it's a quite disturbing video. I mean, I'm going to be honest with everyone listening. I woke up this morning and someone had sent me this video. I clicked on it and immediately I had a visceral reaction. I mean, my blood was boiling. I was so angry. I honestly was almost in tears as I got up out of bed after watching the video and just went about my morning to kind of get ready for my day. I literally, as a fully grown 38-year-old man with kids and who was born and raised in this country in America, I have very rarely can I recount incidences that go this bad between someone out in the public and a Muslim or Muslims. There are instances that occur. There are definitely acts of violence that have occurred in America, hate crimes, that type of thing. But I'm talking about from my own personal experience. Growing up in a somewhat conservative area of the country in Iowa and rural communities, we did experience some things like this. My mom was on a previous podcast where I was walking through her kind of faith journey from Catholicism to Islam, and she starts off the podcast. The clip I shared at the very beginning was of someone just pulling up to her and saying, "Hey, lady, why don't you go back to your country or go back to where you came from?" And that vibe or that sentiment is still out there. It's something that apparently has not fully subsided. It's obviously still in a certain segment of the population's mentality in terms of how they feel it's appropriate to conduct themselves, or how they feel about Muslims and what they can rant and rave and throw out as far as slurs and bigotry towards Muslims in public, which is very, very unfortunate. Now, as you could see in the video, I mean, so my initial reaction, so to finish that point out, I was absolutely torn up inside. I mean, I have so many American friends and fellow Americans that are non-Muslim that are just so supportive and so human and so kind and generous, and there isn't a bad bone in their body as far as how they interact and how they feel about Muslims in America. But then every once in a while you come across something like this, and I think the fact that this was captured in its full, nearly full capacity or context, and these girls were literally doing nothing more than praying kind of on their own in a public place, in a parking garage that they obviously they must have felt secure or comfortable doing so, given that it was kind of off maybe to the side, it seemed like in the video. It was a little bit dark, a little bit quiet in the parking lot or in the parking ramp. It wasn't like super packed with car after car after car all around them. So they must have made a judgment call. They were born and raised in the United States, so I have to trust their judgment in that they felt comfortable and they felt secure, basically practicing their First Amendment protected right, which is to worship in the way that they deem fit, or the way that they believe based on their personal faith belief system. And so my reaction was just visceral. I was so angry and my blood was boiling. And then it turned into sadness, like a profound sense of sadness that, is this really the America that we've kind of given to each other as a people, as a society? Is this the America that a combination of the news cycle, the internet, algorithms, echo chambers, silos, all the other bad, negative stuff that we all know kind of exists around the media ecosystem and just the way we use technology and the way that people engage with other communities? Is this the byproduct? Is that this is the new America that we are staring down the barrel of in terms of how we interact with each other, how our kids interact in public, how safe they feel and how safe we feel and how valued we feel in terms of being American citizens? Is this really the tone and tenor of what we want as America in the future? And I'm asking that question to myself. I'm asking that question to people who are non-Muslim, because they have a very big part to play in the overall welcoming and open kind of nature and environment that America historically has been. to all different faith groups and all different people from all over the world. I also, particularly in this, will call out my fellow Republican, not fellow, but friend, I'm very much nonpartisan. I really vote all over the place historically, but that's neither here nor there. My point is that my Republican friends, conservative friends, I would like to call them out in this video as there really are some actions and some strong condemnations that I think that myself and others with a similar viewpoint would want to see out of that community, not as a way of punishing the community or trying to shame them, but more to just align and do a pulse check to make sure that truly, surely you don't agree with this type of sentiment and the type of views that were expressed in that video. And hopefully you can condemn that as being un-American and truly unpatriotic and being something that completely flies in the face of what it means to be American. And so we'll get into more of that here shortly. But just to kind of hit on some of the meta around this, the details around the high level on the video. So as we mentioned, the relationship between this Perry Greene and Marjorie Taylor Greene. These were three young Muslim women in a Alpharetta, Georgia mall parking garage. They obviously felt comfortable going about their day. And it was actually the day of Eid, which is Eid-ul-Fitr, which is considered to be, one of the two key holidays, the biggest holidays for Muslims throughout the year. We just finished up Ramadan fasting for 30 days. At the end of those 30 days, there's Eid, which is like our big holiday. So she says in the video, it's the equivalent kind of it's a big deal to us. And this is the equivalent. There's different versions of the video circulating online. I encourage people to take a look at several of them so you get the full picture. I only shared the one from CNN just because it was the cleanest version that I could find in terms of video quality to include in this video. But, they mentioned something that this is their holiday in one of the interviews that they did, I think, with local media. I mean, this is Eid, right? This is like the equivalent of, she says, Christmas for Christians. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily the equivalent. She was trying to portray that this is like a big deal for us. Imagine if you were a Christian on Christmas Day walking around in a country and someone started throwing this stuff at you and this kind of racist bigotry ranting that this gentleman felt like he was comfortable and perfectly entitled to carry out on these three women. And it's just shocking that it happened on Eid. I think it adds a little more of insult to the injury, given that this was a day where they had finished fasting for 30 days. They were out, three friends, having a great time, going to the mall probably for the first time since the beginning of Ramadan, where everyone's kind of on their own schedule that's very much fasting centric. It's like, hey, let's, blow off a little steam, relax, go to the mall, have some fun, maybe buy some clothes. They got some money from their family to go get some presents or some gifts for themselves, which is typical for Muslims during the Eid holiday. And they probably wanted to go get something to eat too. I think she mentioned one of the videos that they were trying to go get some sweets, something nice to be able to, in the middle of the day where they were typically fasting, to be able to enjoy themselves. And in the midst of all that, this is what these three girls unfortunately were met with, and sadly, and actually, sickeningly were met with. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, for those who don't know, she is, or MTG as she's referred to, is an American Republican Congresswoman who's been, like I said before, the U.S. representative for Georgia's 14th Congressional District since 2021. You can do your own research on MTG. I will not attempt to influence your overall level of information on her. I mean, I just did a quick Wikipedia. She's very well known in the overall political kind of zeitgeist and discussion around all things happening in America in terms of the Republican Party and all this friction and for lack of a better term, just almost like culture war that's been going on between the left and the right in America for the last several years. So I went on the Wikipedia, and to be fair, I mean, there was just a lot of labels and name calling and almost like, degradation of, by using certain terminology as to who she is. I don't want to do that. I prefer that people do their own research and go and see who Marjorie Taylor Greene is, what her views are, do a little research on your own to see what her policy positions are, and you can draw your own conclusions. Based on my brief research, it does appear that Al-Fareda, the area that these 3 Muslim girls were in, the area of town in Atlanta, where they were kind of harassed with this verbal barrage of bigotry and racism, is not in MTG's district. So it doesn't appear that this is like her district, which would have been just even more ironic. But both are suburbs. The district, the 14th district that MTG represents, and this Alpharetta area of Atlanta are close enough together. They're both suburbs, it appears, of Atlanta, Georgia. As a reminder for folks listening that Georgia went red in 2024 with Trump flipping it by a margin of 2.2% over Kamala Harris. So yeah, and the only reason why I mention that is not to associate it and say, well, it's all of the red, all of the Republican and conservative folks are, sharing this view. That's not at all my point. My point with that was just to say, let's gauge, was this a red state? Was this a blue state? What does it represent in terms of America? And I'm not a political wonk or expert on elections and districting and how local elections, swing one way or the other. But just based on preliminary research, just a quick Google search, it does appear that, Georgia does flip, right? It flips blue, it flips red. It's definitely a contentious state where during all the elections we've seen over the last several elections, Georgia was a big question mark as far as, there is the kind of a blue movement or I'd say migration with certain districts, right? Like the more urban centers of Atlanta and other areas in Georgia are moving more blue and pushing Georgia more blue, whereas the more rural areas, which are less dense in population, are historically more red. So that dynamic, I'll leave it to you to go in and research and look into. But I mention it just to I wanted to gauge, is this like somewhere where these girls maybe should have exercised a little more caution in what they were doing? Is this an area where you would expect to see this kind of behavior based on some of the viewpoints that get circulated in the media ecosystems of one side of the political spectrum versus another? And so I just thought it was interesting. It definitely is kind of, I don't know if it's a swing state technically, but it definitely moves in different directions and has solid representation from both spectrums in terms of politics, both sides of the spectrum. We talked about this being on March 30th, the incident. It's shown on the timestamp for the actual video that it looks like it occurred on March 30th on the day of Eid-ul-Fitr for Muslims, which we already talked about. Now, Perry Greene did go on local TV for a press conference kind of thing that he did where he publicly apologized, saying that it was not a way to treat people, especially not people with any differences. He said, hopefully they'll find it in their hearts to forgive me, and we shouldn't allow that in our society. We'll play the clip here as well, just so that you can see at least the clip that I found of his public apology. So we'll go ahead and play that clip.
I just wanted them to know that I humbly apologize to them because nobody should be treated that way. And that's not the right way for us to treat anybody with any differences. And that's what we came to do. And hopefully they'll find it in their hearts to forgive me. And that, we shouldn't allow that in our society. So thank you.
And something else, so coming back, something else that I want on the back end of that clip that was just played, I wanted to also bring up is that apparently he took time to remind people. I didn't catch the video of this, but apparently this was what the newscaster on a local channel I was watching indicated, that apparently he took the time to remind people that those who practice Islam or Muslim faith are just as American as the next person. So overall, a few comments around this, the fact that there was an apology. To be clear, everyone's responsible for their own actions, right? To start off. So Perry Greene, his views are not necessarily those of Marjorie Taylor Greene, his ex-wife, or vice versa, just as much as any of us have views that are different from our spouses, our kids, whatever it might be. Perhaps, hey, maybe wishful thinking. Perhaps she even divorced him over his racist tendencies, maybe wishful thinking on my part or on many of our parts. But, you can always hope that maybe something like that is what went down, and then she took a stance against racism and bigotry. My gut fear or concern, though, is that these views are shared by a certain segment of America To be fair, there could be people on all sides of the political spectrum who share similar bigoted views. It's not to say that it's only Republicans or conservatives or people on the right or red people. Red America has these views and the blue side doesn't. I do think there are people who are racist and bigoted on all walks of life, all spectrums of politics, religion, you name it. And so I do want to just be fair in that respect for those who are listening. The apology is a big question mark. So going back to the apology, it's a big question mark in my mind. Like you don't just do a 180-degree turn at that age. Like it's not like he's some kid who has some weird views that maybe he got from being radicalized online or whatever it might be. This is a fully grown man, grown adult, upper middle age, clearly involved in the political kind of sphere, right? From his proximity with, because of his proximity to his ex-wife and the whole world that she was wrapped into in terms of her career. Like there's no way that you're that clueless or unaware of like your views and how they might be viewed or perceived by other people. So for someone to do a 180-degree turn within a few days or a day at that age, suddenly realize that all those views that he seemed very adamant about in the video when he was interacting with the three Muslim girls, that he just did a 180 and realized from his heart of hearts that this was all basically, lies and terrible and racist and bigoted, just doesn't really seem convincing to me. You can, make your own judgment call on that. He must have, my sense tells me that he must have gotten a call from someone and been told, listen, this is absolutely terrible optics. Maybe it was someone in his local community that was connected to politics. Maybe it was MTG and her advisors because of the impact it could have on Marjorie Taylor Greene or just the Republican Party in general if they don't distance themselves from something like this. It could have been someone, maybe it was a pastor who took offense to some of the stuff that he was doing from a Christian perspective. You can always hope that something like that did happen. Definitely I think was good to see an apology, and it definitely helps in terms of sending a message to the rest of America that maybe isn't as plugged into some of these issues that behavior is just unacceptable across the board, full stop, right? Now, I don't think that those views are necessarily completely dissolved and clear. I don't know. I can't read his heart. I can't read his mind, but there are definitely instances in my life where I've heard those views from people growing up in rural areas, people saying racist things, saying things that are very similar to what I heard. What I heard didn't shock me in the sense of I've never heard that before. I've heard it probably my whole life from certain folks. It was more the fact that it was caught on camera and it was so visceral and so back and forth and adamant, and he kept following them with his Cybertruck. Not that the Cybertruck factor matters. I'm just saying that's the vehicle he was in. Following them and just kept on harassing them and just kept on these are three, young women. They're, by themselves. They're unthreatening, unarmed. And for a man who's much older in a large vehicle to be circling them kind of as he's like sort of leaving, but sort of not, it's so disgusting to me. And it was so just absolutely shocking. He did apologize. So you got to give credit, where credit is due. However, the fact that he seems so convicted in terms of his beliefs and views around certain things that we'll jump into in a second just doesn't sit with me as being super genuine, and that it was probably a lot of pressure. Most likely, if I had to guess, if I was a betting man, I would say he got a lot of pressure on him from certain interests, public or private, to issue a quick apology so that they could tick that off the list and say, yeah, sure, he issued an apology. What is the left getting so worked up about, essentially? So now let's jump in a little bit. I want to go through the video, not showing the video while I talk, but just going through the conversation that occurred, the exchange between Perry Greene and these Muslim girls. So it starts off, we see where he says, y'all want to do all kinds of crazy, and before I get into this, I am going to say the words that he said using expletives. The reason why is because, one, this is America, it's YouTube. This is not a channel geared towards kids necessarily. It's very much like to be real and be honest about what's happening and be able to express yourself freely, which is, again, a First Amendment guaranteed right under the Constitution of the United States of America, which we are all proud of and all fellow Americans should be proud of and exercise those rights when the time suits them. And so I am going to use the expletives that he used because I think it's important in painting a clear picture of what it feels like to be on the receiving end of someone saying these words rather than trying to tone them down. The video did show them kind of bleeped out. However, I'm going to say them as is. Please don't take offense to it. I hope my listeners don't think that my goal is to just be vulgar for the sake of vulgarity. I really am doing this in an intentional way so that you understand if you were a young woman in that situation and someone was yelling this stuff out of a car window to you, how it might make you feel and what the nature of the threat may be perceived as. So he says, y'all want to do all kinds of crazy shit. So I guess my first question, full stop right there, is like what, right? So, you know, if I hear this, you know, from someone who, you know, is of his ilk, let's say, and he says, y'all want to do all kinds of crazy shit. What are the crazy shit things that someone like this may think that Muslims in a parking garage, 3 girls are up to? I mean, we get into some of this. He talks about praying as if it's a problem. I guess I didn't realize that crazy shit included things like prayer, especially for the conservative or, you know, Christian values community. The only other thing I could think of outside of the praying aspect is if he was thinking of crazy shit, it might be this constant, you know, stereotypical trope that I've heard since I was a kid of Sharia law. You know, oh yeah, you know, Muslims want Sharia law and they want to try to change the American fabric or American way of life. And I just want to clear something up on this point, which is that when there are certain segments that say we want Sharia law, in the United States, I'm sorry to say this to people who may not know this already, but Muslims already practice Sharia law without having to change the United States Constitution or having to change the criminal justice system or having to change too much. Really, for most people in their regular life in America, Sharia law means when I die, I get to stipulate where my inheritance goes in terms of Islamic requirements as far as, you know, bequeathing assets to my children, to spouse, to, you know, whoever. Divorce, you know, when it comes to marriage and divorce, there are some small requirements that there is no problem in America. In the majority of America, people go get married and they end up doing it under American law and are also able to fulfill the requirements of Sharia law, which do not conflict with American law. For the majority of Muslims, Sharia law in America is practiced where it needs to be practiced. Now, where there may not be Sharia law, and also just to finish out the point about in other countries, when people in countries that are not democratic, that are authoritarian run, that have dictatorships, when these kind of people who are educated and maybe have a more moderate and educated, informed opinion talk about Sharia law, they're really saying we want justice and equity and lack of, you know, get rid of nepotism and get rid of corruption and get rid of internal bribing to get what you want out of the legal system. And we want to have a system that more resembles equity and justice and fairness as it is practiced under Western legal systems. Ironically, that's really what people are wanting, right? Is the justice and equity of Western legal systems when they are practiced the way that they are intended to be. I'm not saying that the justice system in the West is perfect or that there aren't certain marginalized groups that get different outcomes than perhaps other folks. Obviously, if you have a really strong lawyer and you have a lot of money, you can get a lot more out of a justice system than if you don't. But there's never going to be a justice system or any system that's completely free of some sort of manipulation, right? And not to defend it, I'm just saying that in a big sense, big picture, 30,000 foot level view, that's always going to be there. What I'm trying to point out is that most people, what they mean when they say Sharia law is really they're saying justice. And when this guy says you want to do all kinds of crazy shit, it just, to me, it's so ignorant and it's so you know, what does crazy shit encompass, right? And so what, you know, people, you think that Muslims are going to try to like institute Sharia law in the United States against the will of the entire American public when we make up like 1 or 2% of the entire population? Like what kind of madness or you know, conspiracy theory type of thinking would have to draw someone to that conclusion? So not to beat a dead horse, let's keep moving on. But I just wanted to point out that this idea of Sharia law is like the boogeyman and you know, the scary thing in the room that everyone on the right needs to be concerned about regarding Muslims or whatever is so just complete bullshit. Sorry, for lack of a better term. It's hard to even explain how fully, ridiculous the notion is. And for those who are willing to take on a more nuanced stance, I just wanted to inform people that really Sharia law to most Muslims, 99% of Muslims, does not mean, oh yeah, we're excited. Now we can start cutting hands off for people who steal and cutting heads off for people who commit capital crimes. That is could not be farther from the truth. What Muslims, the vast majority of Muslims, want is justice, and a system that has justice. Often you notice that people are like, hey, we're cool with it. That you don't see people necessarily screaming and shouting and calling for Sharia law. Now you go to a country where there is no justice and everything is corrupt and there's nepotism and there's complete, trampling of people's rights and civil liberties and no due process, then you see typically people ranting and raving about wanting Sharia law. And what they mean by that is they want justice. So moving on. He then says, where y'all from? What country are you from? And the girl very politely responds, it doesn't matter where we're from, right? So I don't know why he was going down this line of questioning, asking about where they're from. I didn't think that it mattered in America where you happen to be from in terms of national origin or ethnicity. He says, yes, it does. And she says, it does not though. And he says, yes, it does. So he's very adamant that it matters where these girls are from for some reason. And then she says, why does it matter to you though? Again, because you're worshiping a false god, he says. So he says, you're worshiping a false god. So this is clearly bigotry and racism in its clearest form. I mean, worshiping a false god. So you don't believe in the same religion or God or spirituality that I believe in, and therefore you feel that it's okay to start to berate me in public and tell me that I worship a false god, which is ridiculous. From a Christian perspective, Muslims worship one God, even in a more purist sense, some could argue, than Christianity, meaning I know that my Christian brothers and sisters out there be like, no, we worship one God. We don't worship, we're not polytheists. I get that. But the Trinity in and of itself has certain elements that to outsiders seem like, what's going on here? It's not like truly one. It's like something else. And for Muslims, we don't even have that. That's my only point. Like there is not a single thing in Islam that you could point to and say Muslims worship some kind of a false deity in the Christian sense that this guy seems to be coming from. I would say I challenge anyone, go look at the Quran, go look at, go talk to a Muslim. We worship one God, the God of Abraham, the God of Moses, the God of Jesus, the God of all the prophets, the prophetic lineage and tradition under Judeo-Christianity, as well as Muhammad, who we believe was the final messenger and prophet. And so to say that it's like some kind of false God, thing, it's just so ignorant and so ridiculous from a Christian perspective. And then he says, yes, it is. It is a false God. And she says, are you Christian? And so, I mean, she's being this girl, I've got to give my Muslim sister props. She's trying to be patient. They were extremely patient with this gentleman, extremely calm and collected. I mean, they get props for bravery and for courage just to not have been intimidated by this guy, given that they were alone with this man in an SUV, while he was kind of like circling around them. Yes, it is. And they say, are you Christian? He says, yes. She says, we do have the same God, bro. You guys saw that part where she said, we do have the same God, bro. Trying to be casual, trying to be friendly, like, hey, bro, we've got the same God, trying to find some level of connection to the person to try to maybe de-escalate the situation or just kind of point out that, hey, we're bro, hey, bro, it's like saying friendly. You're trying to say, there doesn't have to be beef between us. There does not have to be a problem between us. And then he says, go back to your country, please. We do not want y'all here. And then she says, we know what we believe. And part of the question I have here is why does he feel emboldened to say, we do not want y'all here? He doesn't say, I don't want y'all here. He says, we don't want y'all here. So the question in my mind is, who's we, right? So is we him and his family, him and his little tribe or circle of people? Is it him and his political affiliation group? Is it him and his religious affiliation group? Like, who is we? And, does he speak for all of America? Who's we, man? And so she says, we know what we believe, very confidently and proudly. And he says, well, don't come to America and believe this shit. Go back to your fucking country with that crazy ass shit. And she says, we are out here peaceful, praying. So I just want to, God, this got to me so bad. I mean, I don't even know what to say. I want to draw attention to the fact that he says, don't come to America and believe this shit, meaning your religion. Go back to your fucking country with that crazy ass shit. And so the level of bigotry, these girls then proceed later on down to explain that they're from America. They were born and raised in the United States. And so I want to bring up the First Amendment. I think it's appropriate at this point. The First Amendment, for those who may have forgotten, who may be listening on the right or maybe listening on the left, doesn't matter. The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I say that one more time, not the entire thing, but the key point. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So we're talking about a First Amendment, not the second, not the third, not the 10th. They chose, the founding fathers and our government, our, forefathers, forebears, ancestors, whatever you want to call them, chose in their wisdom to make the very First Amendment of the United States that Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion. And the fact that this guy seems to be targeting these women because they have a different religion and saying that they don't therefore have a place in America, to me, it's like, what does it mean to be American, right? What does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be, we'll get to conservative and Christian in a minute, but what does it mean to be American? It's just shocking. And we find this beautiful, and I want to share something here, which is, I'm a big fan of Washington, D.C., not in terms of its politics and its toxicity that it's taken over the last several years. I'm more a fan of Washington, D.C. in terms of being a born and raised American who traveled to Washington, D.C. for the very first time on business in my career, and later returned multiple times. And I always took a few extra days here and there where I could for leisure to be able to explore Washington, D.C., because I had never been there growing up as a kid. And I was like, so the first time I went to Washington, D.C., I was in my 30s, and I was like, oh my God, this place is so cool. It gave me that sense of like all the movies, all the TV shows, all the popular culture references to DC, all the news, channel shows that I watched growing up, Meet the Press and all the others, Sunday morning news. You see like the giant monuments in the background, and you think of like Forrest Gump when he goes running where he stood where MLK Jr. gave his famous speech on the mall, and he goes running into the reflection pool or the reflecting pool and to meet Jenny and hug and whatever else. I mean, Washington, D.C. is so iconic, right? Even the Doomsday movies where like the aliens come, they always target Washington. They show the White House being obliterated, or they show our monuments being obliterated in the apocalypse of whatever scenario in a movie. It's so iconic. And I was absolutely thrilled to have the chance to go to Washington, D.C. for the first time, and then subsequently made several visits for work and leisure. And last visit was I took my oldest son to go teach him about Washington, D.C., the history of America, and to make sure that he understood that as a young Muslim boy growing up in America, that he has a place in America and that he is part of the fabric that is America. And one of the most beautiful monuments that I came across, I walked them all on my own and then also with other people that I've taken for a trip or two. One of my favorite monuments that I waited to the very end to see, and if I had known, I would have gone there much sooner. And you walk in, for those who've never been to DC, you walk up to these monuments. They're massive, they're beautiful. They're in this like white stone that looks very much like Greek or Roman architecture. And the columns, the vastness, the height, the scale, it's beautiful. And it's very inspiring, and it's very symbolic, and it's intended to evoke certain emotions from people as citizens of the United States, which I understand. And they have these placards whenever you go up to them that say, be quiet, be respectful. Now, these are stone structures. They're not, people that are doing something that you can't disturb, so keep quiet so you don't disturb them. It's saying, be respectful, be quiet. So it's a traditional kind of value that says to show respect, be quiet, don't be yapping and yelling and screaming and horsing around and, being an idiot. This is a place of reverence, a place that is to some people sacred, where you go and you think and reflect on what it means to have to be in a country that has freedom and liberty. And so what I want to do is share my favorite quotation from the Jefferson Memorial. I would really encourage folks to go to Washington, D.C., go check out the Jefferson Memorial. And this was a quote that shows up on the Northwest portico in Washington, D.C. of the Jefferson Memorial. It says, this is the quote from Thomas Jefferson: "Almighty God hath created the mind free. All attempts to influence it by temporal punishments or burthens are a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion. No man shall be compelled to frequent or support religious worship or ministry, or shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief. But all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion. I know but one code of morality for men, whether acting singly or collectively." And this was an excerpt from a bill for establishing religious freedom drafted in 1777. It was first introduced in the Virginia General Assembly in 1779 after he had become governor, and passed by the Virginia Assembly in 1786, while Jefferson was serving as minister to France. The last sentence is excerpted from a letter to James Madison, dated August 28, 1789, as he was returning to America to assume his position as Secretary of State. One of the most beautiful quotes that I could ever imagine a human being who is trying to establish a country and a political system could come up with in terms of our modern culture and our modern day that we live in, right? So I just want to point out that is what is in the Constitution. This is what the founding fathers believed. One of the main founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. So I would, again, we'll come back to the issue of conservative viewpoints and conservative values in a moment, but I just wanted to point that out there. So he says, "You're worshiping out here." And she says, "Praying, what does that have anything to do with you?" And he says, "Go back to your country, your demolished, poor-ass fucking Middle Eastern country." So first off, we're actually born here, she says. She says, first off, we're actually born here. And then he says, "No, you weren't." She says, "Yes, we were." "Then why are you wearing all this shit? You're not American, be American." So let's unpack this a little bit. So first he says, you're worshiping out here. So is that a problem? So is it a problem for someone to be, I thought one of the primary things that the conservative movement, Christian right movement was all worked up about over the last many years is prayer, not being able to have prayer, certain prayer elements in public schools, things related to worship being infringed upon by like a secular kind of state or system. And here's, 3 girls going about their day, praying in public. Not like in front of everyone, just, trying to make a statement. They were literally kind of minding their own business, trying to pray. And he has a problem with it, evidently, because you're not praying the way a Christian prays, you're praying the way a Muslim prays. Where he says, go back to your country, your demolished, poor-ass fucking Middle Eastern country. I guess my question is just, is that like a way that someone who has any decency or humility or a people that have an ideology, hopefully it's not shared by too many, but I think sadly it is, you would say that go back to your demolished, poor-ass fucking Middle Eastern country. So, I guess my question would be like, who demolished this country that he's thinking of? Is he proud of the fact that it was demolished? Why would you want to send people back to a demolished country rather than having empathy and sympathy and being like, hey, listen, if your country's demolished, which, hey, maybe our, super deep state, what do you want to call it? Hyper militaristic, foreign policy that's been captured by special interests in Washington and the military industrial complex had a part in demolishing, maybe you can live here peacefully so that you don't have to go back to that country and then maybe get bombed and die. Instead of having that opinion, it's, no, you should go back there. Maybe then we'll drop some more bombs and then you can die in that bombing campaign. So then she says, first off, we're actually born here. So, hey, we're red-blooded American citizens, just like anyone else. What does it mean to be American if not being born in America? Does it make a difference if you were born in America and your parents now have to meet a certain criteria? Do your parents have to be Irish or German or European background in order for you to be a true American? Or does it just mean that you're born and raised in America? No, none of us choose how we're born or where we're born, right? So everyone is born by a circumstance of fate and chance, essentially, into whatever country that they happen to be in. He says, no, you weren't. So he doesn't believe that she was born in America because she dresses a certain way. He says, no, you weren't. She says, yes, we were. Then he says, then why are you wearing all that shit? You're not American, be American. And she says, it's a religion. Like, why I'm wearing this stuff is probably because of her religion. And think about this. Why are you wearing all that shit? These two girls were some of the most beautifully dressed, modestly dressed girls that you could find in America. They were wearing headscarves and they were wearing loose clothing, traditional Islamic clothing. And he's saying, why are you wearing all that shit? I mean, think about how bigoted and racist this language is that he's using, calling the way someone dresses shit because they happen to be modest. And what I want to challenge is my conservative friends, brothers and sisters who are Christian conservatives. I want to read you a quote from Timothy 2:9 from the Bible. This is from the New Testament. So there are a lot of times where folks out there, I'll say this is from the, I'll bring an example out and it'll be from the Old Testament in my discussions with Christians, friends and family. And they'll say, well, that's the Old Testament. The New Testament's different. We really take our stuff from the New Testament. So this is from the New Testament, as much as I believe it is. Timothy 2:9 in context here says, I believe it's verse 7. And for this purpose I was appointed, a herald and an apostle. I am telling the truth, I am not lying, and a true and faithful teacher of the Gentiles. Therefore, I want the men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or disputing. Now pay attention to this next verse. I also want the women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. So this is from the Bible, Timothy 2:9. Now, people out there can come and say, well, we don't follow that anymore, or it's been revised, or our teachers, our preachers preach something different, or whatever you want to say, man. The scripture is clear. I just read it straight out of Timothy, the book of Timothy in the Bible. And clearly there's a case for modesty, and modesty being something that is venerated. We just talked about on episode, 2 or 3, my mom was Catholic, born and raised Catholic, and later reverted to Islam. And I know Catholics. I know Catholicism. Some of the most amazing, kind, generous, beautiful people that exist on the planet. And I know that they fully value modesty, because the Virgin Mary is always displayed in churches in a modest way. She has modest clothing on. She even has a headscarf on that very much resembles hijabs that Muslim women wear. And the fact that this guy is saying you're wearing all this shit, when in the Bible itself and in even Western Judeo-Christian society and ideology about the past, where the roots of Christianity come from, there's an obvious precedence and an obvious notion that modesty is a good thing. It's just shocking to me, the hypocrisy and the amount of hate that seems to have captured this gentleman versus rational logic and actually his own faith tradition. And the reason why I say this, if you say, well, hey, why are you judging this guy, as a Christian? He says he's Christian. So he says, maybe if you want to enjoy America, be a fucking American. Go be fucking Afghani or whatever the fuck you are. And then she says, you're literally racist. You're assuming things. And I mean, look at what he says. He's, maybe if you want to enjoy America, be a fucking American, meaning you can't be an American unless you look a certain way. That's the notion. And I want to sit on this for just a second here with you folks. I guess my understanding of what it means to be American has always been that, the law, the Constitution, the entire framework, the whole dream, the whole promise of America was on this notion that if you had like two people with plots of land next to each other, with their own lives being lived out, their own, desires, dreams, property, etc., on that land, that you don't get to deny someone their due process or their basic fundamental civil liberties and rights because they present a certain way. Like my neighbor, for example, I have two great neighbors, but let's just take an example. If my neighbor is your average American in terms of how they present, shorts and t-shirt, baseball cap, mows the lawn, drinks a beer, has a barbecue with his family, a good old boy American. And I happen to be, let's just say, I'm not, but let's just say I'm always out in my property running around wearing a dress, okay? I'm wearing a wedding dress as a man. And I go out into my property and I sometimes like to, for example, do some kind of weird, odd, like a dance thing around my fire pit just because I like to. I play music, not in a disturbing way, but I go out there and I get all crazy and I start jumping around in my wedding dress and dancing around. Does that mean that I don't have civil liberties and that someone could come and take my property or could kick me out of my home or deport me and send me back to another place that they deemed as like my country? I thought that the promise of America we would resoundingly say, no, that does not mean that. Like a person who lives a certain way that's completely contrarian, completely different from everyone else around them has protection under the law in America. And you do not get to kick that person out of the country because they wear certain clothes, because they speak a certain language, because they profess certain ideals, they have a certain religion. They, even if they're the most ridiculous, let's just say I'm trying to be kind of crass here. Hopefully you appreciate it. I go out and I start hooting and hollering at the top of my lungs every morning as part of my morning wake up tradition. I grab sticks and I twirl them in the air, and then I hit myself on the legs with them in front of my neighbors in the morning when I'm out in my driveway, and they're just looking out their windows through their blinds going, what in the heck is going on over at, the Mancy household? I mean, these people are insane. Okay, fine. But does that mean that the government, local police, these neighbors could like all of a sudden come over and just take over my property or kick me out of my home or send me back to some other country? No, I really thought that we agreed that absolutely is not what America means. And so I think we need to get this notion out of our heads. I think there are people in this country that have a notion that your rights, your way of living, your identity, everything is protected under American law as long as it resembles closely enough what I'm comfortable with. And I think that's a notion that we have to throw out the window and challenge continually. Because if we are going to be Americans and have a true, beautiful promise of America, to me and most people, if you read the Constitution and the writings of the Founding Fathers, it meant that everyone, regardless of those things, provided they don't infringe on someone else's rights or that they're not harassing or threatening people or using violence against people, they're going about their life and they have certain practices that they do, they're protected, and they are protected in a sacred sense, that this is America and the promise of our country and what we all believe in and what many of us send our sons and daughters to go fight and die for, during at least 2 great world wars and other wars in between or around after and before, was for this promise of America. And so just shocking to me, absolutely shocking. And so then he says, go be fucking Afghani or whatever the fuck you are. And then she says, you're literally racist. Now listen to this. This is one that just absolutely boggles my mind and something that I think we need to draw attention to as a phenomenon that's really irked me for a very long time. He says, it doesn't matter. Use the racist word, but be American. Don't be fucking fucked up bullshit. And so this thing he says where he says, it doesn't matter, use the racist word. There is a trend that has been occurring online, on the right, conservative ecosystems of media, where the idea that we have reached like a post-racist society or point in time where racism doesn't exist has been pushed over and over again on that side of the political spectrum. And it's what kind of undergirds the whole DE&I warfare that's been going on. It's something that more and more people we'll get to like the podcast people that regurgitate this type of stuff or promote this kind of stuff. But I've seen it slowly leak its way into like major podcasts that I listened to historically, where they think that like racism doesn't exist and that the word racist is a tool or a cheap trick or weapon used by the left or the fringe left or whatever you want to call it to try to like shame people into submission and intimidate people on the right who are otherwise just normal blokes that are going about their day. You'll hear Piers Morgan repeat this type of stuff. You'll hear, even sadly, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, another one sadly that turned into this, Ben Shapiro expectedly, and then several others in the podcast world that have huge audiences that keep on repeating this. They even made like a Netflix film about this very issue a while back, and it circulated where it's like trying to say that there's no longer racism, and like they go and interview a bunch of people and try to demonstrate that racism is a bunch of bullshit and it doesn't exist the way people think it does. And this is just a clear example of what people who go roll their eyes when they hear those arguments say, hey, I've experienced it firsthand many times in my life, but you never have like a video of it to show someone and say, look, this is what it looks like, right? They say, oh, you know, have thicker skin. I've heard people tell me, get over it. You know, you shouldn't be worried about it. You know, hey, you know, someone said something to you that was a little bit offensive. Your name was weird, or they said, oh, get over it. You know, it's just all in good fun. They were joking, whatever. I'm sorry, but if you watch this video, I don't care who you are. If you're being honest with yourself and you watch this video and you say, would I want someone to do that to my daughter or my child when they're out having fun with their friends in any context? Just flip the script a little and have someone who's a ranting and raving lunatic who happens to be from a different faith tradition doing this to your daughter. How would you feel? Would you feel that that's acceptable and she should just have thicker skin and get over it? I would challenge those folks and say that absolutely not. I'm calling bullshit on that. They would not be okay with it. And so he says, it doesn't matter. Use the racist word, meaning like eye roll, racist word. Here it comes from a liberal. Some lefty, wokey lunatic is using the racist word to shame me, an upper middle-aged white man, into not being able to be who I am and express myself in my fullest. That's the vibe that I got from this. And I think people need to understand, and people, I would challenge, if this ever becomes viral, this video, and, you know, it gets, you know, seen or heard by the likes of some of these, you know, big podcast king type people, like, this exists. Racism in America is still real. Now, it doesn't have to be thrown around constantly, and it's not the primary thing that influences everything. I agree with them on that. However, and there has been a lot of progress around racism in America over the last several, you know, many years, a few decades, especially given just the explosion of the internet and phones and people, you know, getting more exposure across the board to different cultures and communities. But it still exists. It's alive and well and kicking. And there are certain segments of society in America that definitely espouse racist views and hold racist viewpoints that are truly just absolutely mind-boggling. And the fact that they act them out then at times and think that there's nothing wrong with it and that, you know, oh, who cares? You know, you can throw the racist word around. That's just a bunch of bullshit. You know, it's like putting fingers in their ears to even the opportunity for someone to get through to them, to teach them that, you know, their viewpoints are misplaced or misconstrued, and that they should have different viewpoints and update those viewpoints based on real information and not lies and stereotypes. So she then says, if it's not up to your standards, you can leave, to the gentleman, she says. I don't know why you're wasting your time. Like, he keeps on slowly following them. So look at this. I mean, even when they warned, so they say also they warned that they'll call the cops. It didn't scare or have an impact on him. He didn't like immediately drive off because they said, hey, we'll call the cops. You're harassing us. They asked him to go about his day, and he still kept following them and go back. Then he says, go back to your country in the final piece here. And, you know, so again, just to kind of go into a few other points that I think are really important around this. We talked about the First Amendment. We talked about the Jefferson Memorial and the Founding Fathers and their understanding of what it means in terms of religious freedom and liberty in the United States of America. I do want to hit on something around Christian values. He said he was a Christian, and I think I have experienced similar interactions in my own life with people on kind of like the Christian conservative side and in America. What are Christian values? I guess would be my challenge for Christians to think about. Do people care about Christian values, or is it some made up fictional American value code that we are all now expected to adhere to? So if you say Christian values, I just read you a verse from the Bible that clearly indicates that Christianity has a respect and it's supposed to have a reverence for women who are more conservative or dress modestly. You know, is it Christian values, or is it some kind of like cult American value system that you want everyone to sign up for or practice or demonstrate in some kind of a virtue signally way to make everyone who holds this kind of lifestyle feel more comfortable and feel validated? So I challenge that because, you know, what are Christian values? I've always understood them to be family values, you know, having a focus on a mother and a father, raising a family in the traditional sense. I've heard from people that a big part of Christian values is, you know, faith and spirituality not being something that like the state cracks down on or infringes, impedes in any way, allows you to be your full Christian self in school or in work or wherever you might be. Hey, I could ascribe to that. I could subscribe to that. It's beautiful, right? I've heard that as a Muslim for sure. Sex before marriage, sex outside of marriage. I've met very young Christians that are very proud. They wear like these bracelets about how they're saving themselves for marriage. It was a big popular movement back when I was in college. Great. Those are Christian values that I think they would definitely align with what the Bible says and what Scripture says. But to me, if there are any Christian practicing fathers or mothers out there, I would challenge them to say, like, how many of you would actually want your daughter dressed more modestly versus being out and showing and having herself out there in the way that modern culture promotes, which is like super short shorts where practically, people's butts are hanging out of their shorts. I've seen them, we walk around Chicago like anyone else. You go to the mall, you go downtown, wherever, and you see like shocking what the clothing has become in terms of American culture in the United States, right? Or in the West. I mean, I'm talking about when I was a kid, it wasn't that extreme. And then now the change to where really nothing is left to the imagination, right? Sometimes you're like shy, you got to look away because it's like, I'm a 38-year-old and there'll be some girls that are really like, they seem pretty darn young walking around us when I'm walking with my wife and kids in a mall. And, half their butt is hanging out of their shorts in the summer. It's ridiculous. And so I would challenge Christian fathers out there who I know many of them, and I know many who are amazing people, to say, would you really, if you had it in your heart of hearts the way you want, would you prefer to see your daughter dressed that way? And continue dressing that way? Or are you being peer pressured and kind of succumb to the peer pressure that your daughter succumbs to where they keep on working you slowly to where it's like, okay, fine, whatever, get your shorts and get out of that, go do whatever, be the teenager or whoever you're going to be. That happens with parents, right? Where they kind of work us into like, okay, you're going to get what you want, kid, go ahead. I don't want to be the domineering parent who kills all your fun and joy or whatever. But I would challenge Christians to think about this. Like, if you are really wanting sex to be only within marriage and for your kids to like save themselves for marriage someday, which is very unrealistic anymore given the culture, that's neither here nor there. Would you prefer that they dress more modestly or dress less modestly? And the reason why I say that is, I think there are Christian parents out there who, if they were being honest with themselves, they would love to hear that their daughter or daughters and their friend circle was out at a mall, dressed modestly, without all their skin hanging out for anyone to just, or perverts out there to like, look and gawk and take advantage of in some, way. And also pray. Why don't we pray? How many Christian parents would love to hear that their kids were out there and they just decided on a whim, like, hey, it's the middle of the day, it's 2:00. You guys want to pray together? Like, it's just mind-boggling that is something that is being criticized and being targeted by racism when it's supposed to be what I thought Christian values were promoting and were all about. I guess it only matters if like you're worshiping Jesus and you're a Christian, but if you're of a different faith group, it really doesn't mean anything to folks, certain folks. So we go back to this, point here of the idea of what it means to be an American. Is it only for those who dress a certain way, look like the majority, worship like the majority, or is the whole point of America and the Constitution to literally guarantee that citizens are protected from the tyranny of the government and the majority? I pose that question to everyone to think about. So getting close to the closing here, I'd like to call out my Republican and conservative friends and make a few key points. I think the myth that has been peddled by the right media ecosystem that racism no longer exists and that it's just some kind of weapon that's used by the left is completely exposed in this incident. This is exactly the kind of stuff that people in America have experienced for decades, other groups worse than some, and why there's such a fear that by ignoring racism, pretending it doesn't exist and that it's all bullshit when minorities complain about it, it'll only embolden people like Perry Greene and like those who secretly support his views and these views, and it'll make America less safe and less American over time. The other thing to consider is that it's on my Republican and conservative friends to fully condemn and reject this type of thinking and behavior. Like, I'm going to be watching closely, and other people will be too, to see that people do the right thing, the Christian thing, which is to come out and condemn this type of behavior and thinking across the board whenever they experience it or see it in their circles. We all have to police our own circles for extremists and people with fringe views and harmful, ways of thinking. And it's on my Republican and Christian conservative brothers and sisters and friends to do the same thing in their circles, please. I also want to challenge, the Joe Rogan, Piers Morgan, Bill Maher, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, countless other podcasters who sold this idea that racism doesn't really exist anymore and that it's an antiquated idea that manipulates people, and this idea that, it's always the left talking about the patriarchy so that they can somehow, use fear to get things out of society and get more votes and whatever else. Could it be politicized? I agree that certain groups and interests do maybe exaggerate or try to blow things out of proportion. But underlying is that this stuff exists. It's there. There are people that we work with, people that we think of as possibly colleagues, friends, people in the community that have these views. And we need more people to take a stance against this and condemn and reject these notions that were espoused by this gentleman, Perry Greene. One real quick point on DE&I. I know that DE&I has been kind of the main thing that keeps getting thrown around nowadays as being just, a boogeyman term. But, that plane crash that happened in Washington, D.C. several weeks back, where Trump immediately came out and said, hey, DE&I is to blame, right? Then the wildfires in California before that, the DE&I is to blame. And then I haven't heard anything. I don't know about you, but I think they probably by now have finished their investigation. If not, they will soon. And so far, I've heard nothing to indicate there's crickets on the whole DE&I point around the plane crash that happened in Washington, D.C. between the flight that crashed into the military helicopter. I think it wasn't really DE&I, just like most adults sitting and listening to this entire press conference that happened where Trump was ranting and raving about DE&I right out the gate while people were still trying to figure out if their loved ones were alive or dead, or finding out that they had just perished and they haven't even recovered their bodies fully. I think it was just absolutely one of the most shameless demonstrations that of a leader that I've ever seen in my life. If you're a leader of a Burger King, if you're like a general manager of a Lowe's or a Home Depot or a Menards in America, you're expected to live up to better leadership skills and standards than this. And we're talking about the president of the United States in a moment of tragedy for the entire country, to go out there and start railing about DE&I when you haven't even finished or started an investigation to know what actually happened in that situation. But DE&I think what you need to understand, my Republican and conservative friends, is that this is the kind of person that DE&I, people who are okay or like DE&I initiatives in workplaces or in other areas, are hoping to avoid and get rid of, right? It's like you want some kind of a program, was the thinking, to try to tamper or avoid this type of viewpoint or person from having these secret kind of views, and then activating them, right? And actually, enacting certain hiring decisions, certain firing or termination decisions, reorganization decisions in businesses or in nonprofits or in government, based on things around race, right? Versus making them a much more inclusive and welcoming environment for people of all different backgrounds. And so, hey, does DE&I have a bad rap for certain reasons that may be justifiable or there could be some truth to? Sure, I'm willing to concede that. Not every DE&I program is going to be a 5-star perfect. Everything could be fallible, and everyone is capable of making mistakes. But I think I just want people to understand, like, this is what the people who are in favor of DE&I or who like these types of programs, their hope is that you then have an awareness and a shaming of this type of behavior that Perry Greene demonstrated, and an understanding continuously that you're being, carefully considered and watched to ensure that this stuff doesn't happen, that this stuff doesn't leak into actual business decisions for the sake of other people at the workplace not having their rights trampled on or being denied something simply because they're dressed a certain way. If this guy was in a company and deciding whether to hire 2 or 3 people, and some of the applicants happen to be Muslim or present the way these girls present in public, do you think he would have been a big fan of choosing them for a job? if you're going to say that, you're delusional. I'm sorry. Like, you're absolutely not being genuine. You're being disingenuous to say that you think that they would legitimately choose Muslim women to work, even if they were the most qualified candidate, which is always the big misnomer or thing that those people say is like, oh, well, we just want the most qualified candidates. Well, if you have someone like Perry Greene sitting in a position of authority and he's going to choose between 5 or 6 or 10 candidates and he needs 3 positions filled, and out of those 5 or 6 or 10 candidates, let's say you got a bunch of people who are Muslim women that are highly qualified, do you think that he would choose them? And so the goal of DE&I from the people who are somewhat for it with a willingness and openness to understand that maybe there are some reforms that need to be made around some of the programs and how they're implemented. The big thing for people is like, I want to know that we have some way of buffering against those types of people, the Perry Greene types, from bringing their views and actualizing them and activating them in some way at work through decision making. And so I just want people to kind of think about that a little bit and maybe be a little more self-critical rather than assuming that all D&I, sentiment is just misplaced and stupid and ridiculous and roll their eyes about it. Another one is the final couple points for my Republican and conservative friends. You lose all credibility if you harbor these types of voices and ideology of hate within your ranks. It's quite simple, right? If you do not call out this type of behavior and thinking, you're only going to get undermined, right? I mean, forget the point that there's so much potential for the Christian community who are all about conservative values and family values and whatnot to build bridges and connections with conservative people and other faith groups like Muslims, like the Jewish community, like whatever other, even Hindu community, to be able to come to some kind of like agreement or understanding in terms of like support and what we want our freedoms of religious practice to be able to, exist like or transform into over the coming years in America as society changes. You need allies. And by harboring these types of viewpoints and these types of people and not separating and distancing yourself from them, you're only undermining your credibility. And it really reeks of just complete hypocrisy based on just simple Google searches of the First Amendment, of the Bible, in terms of what these types of people are espousing. And there also is one other point that I want to make, final one. It's probably a bit controversial, but I'm going to make it anyway, because we are living in America where the First Amendment and the Constitution guarantee our rights, and freedom of speech is chief among them as well. A lesson from this with respect to the Palestine issue. So if you are someone who happens to understand the viewpoint of Perry Greene or shares perhaps even the viewpoint of Perry Greene, what was he really saying? He was saying that you are not American, go back to where you came from, mostly because of the way that they presented, meaning that you must not have been here for too long. If you lived here or you were like 5th, 6th, 7th generation American, you wouldn't look like that. So you're kind of new. The insinuation is that you're an immigrant maybe. This isn't really your country because you haven't proven your true, Americanness in whatever way. So go back to where you came from. I want you to imagine what Palestinians in the West Bank feel when they see people, they've lived in those areas for thousands of years. Imagine like a farmer in the West Bank who has been farming their land for 7, 8, 9, 10 generations, like as far back as he can trace his family lineage, they've owned that land. It's been passed down from his great, 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 great grandfather down to the next one, the next one, the next one, all the way to them. And suddenly you see this like in this wave after wave of like white European, Jewish settler type people coming in. They start harassing you. They start taking over your land. They get immediate citizenship. They start to be able to decide whether or not you can dig on your own land for water, what kind of well depths you can have. They start to dictate what roads you can drive on. They start to build walls around you. They start to harass you with sticks, sometimes even with violence, with guns. You go and try to get some kind of a reprieve from this, from the government, and the Israeli court system or the Israeli police system doesn't do anything really for you. They mostly just kind of protect the settler class from whatever it is that they've done. Imagine, these people like the Perry Greene types are so threatened by people peacefully living in the United States who present differently to the point that they want to kick them out and send them back to where they came from. But they expect that people in other countries, a Palestinian, for example, in the West Bank, who's been living on that land for generations, should be completely fine with not someone coming from a white European, Western, Jewish background suddenly being implanted into their country as a settler and being given a bunch of land that never belonged to them in recent history. They're okay. They expect those people to be okay with that when that person is not coming in just peaceably going around their day, going around their life and living their life. These are people that are actually working with the government, with extreme elements within the government, to literally push you off your land, scare you, intimidate you, harass you, sometimes kill you or your family members, for you living peaceably and peacefully on your land. I mean, the amount of cognitive dissonance and the amount of hypocrisy and insanity that you have to not see the irony and the incredible, just absolute corruption, tyranny. I don't know words. It's hard to find words. It really is, as an American, for what this this obvious contradiction is and represents. Now, I'd like to close with some messages to my fellow Muslim Americans. One, do not be intimidated. Do not back down. Do not shy away from being some of the best of what America has to offer. Don't do it. Not for a second. America is just as much our land, our home, as it is anyone else's whose parents happen to immigrate from Ireland or from Germany or any other country. The lesson in this is just to be careful, I would say. Exercise judgment when you're in certain environments. Better to be in more public spaces when praying than in a really kind of secluded, maybe off to the side kind of space. I would say just exercise good judgment. I'm not trying to criticize these girls. They didn't do anything wrong. I'm just trying to say that given the environment that we live in with this many, these types of crazy, whether it's online radicalized or, kind of like insular groups that have these little echo chambers where they don't ever get challenged for their views, people running around, be smart, practice your religion, but just be wise about how you do it to make sure that you maintain your safety and you're not putting yourself in a potentially jeopardizing situation. These three beautiful examples of being, these three girls, beautiful examples of being proud, strong American Muslims should be a lesson to all of us, not just Muslims, but even other faith communities and other groups within this country. How brave they were. They handled themselves in what could have been a potentially dangerous situation so well. They kept their cool. They weren't intimidated. They just kept walking and kept responding respectfully. They didn't curse. They didn't say anything terrible or demeaning. I mean, they were so well put together in terms of how they conducted themselves. It's hard to even put a term or an accolade on it. Finally, in closing, I want to throw out a call to action. We as Muslims, in my opinion, need to be more engaged with folks on all sides of the spectrum. It's not just those that we feel comfortable with, right? So I think traditionally, historically, we've gravitated towards like liberals and Democrats and the left, not because we align with them truly in terms of 100% on our lifestyles and social issues and viewpoints around religion and culture, but more because we really disagree so adamantly with the right in terms of foreign policy. And some of the things that the right, like people like this who get kind of harbored by the right, they just alienate us immediately. And we think, that's not my party, right? I'm not going to them. And those aren't my people. I get that. I totally do. But I think we need to challenge ourselves to engage more with our Christian brothers and sisters in America to understand and correct some of the views that they have, understand what they are and then correct them and have an influence on shaping their views, because a lot of them just have never met Muslims in a positive or a social context or a personal context. And therefore it's easy for them just to kind of otherize Muslims because they only hear about us in the news and on online, media that's really not positive towards us. We need to understand and connect with them. If we only stay in our echo chambers, we might give each other pats on the back and feel good about it. And, it all feels, like, oh, we're all in alignment. But we're leaving out a giant segment of America, which that's really the crux of the issue to me is we need those folks to have more interactions with us, because I have a confidence and a belief that if you interact with Muslims, if you get to know Muslims in your life, it's nothing but positive. I've never heard of someone who got to know a Muslim and was like, man, that person was a total a-hole. That person was terrible. They were so selfish, greedy, but never. It's the opposite. And so I really encourage us to get out of our echo chambers as Muslims and engage the entire community. And I think it's going to build bridges. It's going to connect us and make for a much better, safer, more flourishing America that us and our children can thrive in the future. A lot of this is birthed out of ignorance. You know, the viewpoints that were espoused in the video by this guy, they're birthed out of ignorance and a lack of them knowing much at all. It's really, you know, ignorance combined with online propaganda that creates this type of mentality. And so I would encourage us all to just do more in our own settings, circles, private lives, to befriend and get to know people who are, you know, more different than maybe what we feel more traditionally comfortable with in terms of engagement, and try to affect change in a positive way that way. Anyway, so hopefully, you know, I know this was kind of a long video about this issue, but it hit me so hard this morning when I woke up and saw it. I had to get on my my platform here, on my podcast, and do a monologue, my second monologue, to address this, because I think I'm feeling and thinking about this in ways that a lot of other folks out there are as well. We'll see in the coming days what happens in terms of more organized and coordinated, you know, condemnation and criticism from the parties that we all are waiting to hear that from. I don't know how much we'll hear. I'm hopeful, but cautiously hopeful. But if there's anything that we can do to continue this conversation around these issues and bring awareness and, try to affect change, I mean, that is what this podcast is for. Please, please, please support the podcast by liking, subscribing, and sharing as broadly as you can. Take short clips out of it, share it on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever you want. And also help bring people in terms of guests who can really have a positive impact in terms of conversation quality for this podcast within this community, and then also hopefully, you know, at a larger scale as time goes on. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. God bless everyone involved in this whole, you know, issue, right, left, Muslim, non-Muslim. There are so many good people on so many sides of this, and I really hope that the good people, the mature people, the adults in the room will be the ones that prevail, and not these extreme voices that sometimes bubble up on either side of any spectrum. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.